live?
Are we going live?
We're live. We're actually testing the system.
It looks like we're live right now. Are we live?
Yeah.
All right. Jai Shri Gurudev. Jai. Dasa Vrindavanam Vande Krishna Dasa Prabhum Tata Chanavatar Chaitanya Lila Vishtar Kadino Dro Nityananda Parabja Arunarena Bhushito Vyaktachano Budachincho Vavande Vyasurupino Shri Guru Gaur Gandharva Govindascha Ganaisaha Jayanti Patakascha Sarvesham Gurunartino. So we want to offer Dandavat Pranams to all of our beautiful family members, physically present, virtually present. And we are continuing with Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Could you close that door, Pandita? Devi Dasi. So let's see where we are. Adi Lila chapter 10. So I'm going to pick up from verse 115. We're continuing the branches of the Chaitanya tree. Oh no, actually, I think we were later. Oh yeah, we read that already. Here we are. Arjata Bhaktagan Gorajesha Bhasi Patyabde Prabhude Deke Nila Chole Asi. All the devotees who resided in Bengal used to visit Jagannath Puri every year to see the Lord. Nila Chole Prabhu Saha Pratar Milan Se Bhaktagana Ebe Koriye Ganan. Now let me enumerate the devotees of Bengal who first came to see the Lord at Jagannath Puri. Vishakha Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya Tar Bhagnipati Shri Gopinatacharya. Okay, so we were hearing before devotees more connected with Bengal, and then devotees who came with Mahaprabhu from Bengal to Puri, and now we're going to hear devotees who first met Mahaprabhu in Puri. Vishakha Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya Tar Bhagnipati Shri Gopinatacharya. There was Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, one of the biggest branches of the tree of the Lord, and his sister's husband, Shri Gopinatacharya. So this meeting of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and Mahaprabhu, very special, right? Very beautiful. It's very nice to, remember all the leelas that are connected with the names that we hear. So Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, we hear that he was actually Brihaspati, right? Who's the guru of the devas, of the demigods. And he's actually an example of someone who, we're told, was upgraded by his involvement in Gaura Leela. Because generally Mahaprabhu's associates, his closer associates, they're parshads. They're part of the package, right? They're eternal associates of the Lord, and they're descending with him as a part of the whole play, right? It is like a traveling carnival, right? That goes from town to town. It is like that. The Lord's Leela moves from one Brahmanda, one universal system, to another universe, like that. And it's a whole group, and they're moving together, right? But some special cases, there are some who they're visiting, they live in the local town, they're visiting, and then they end up joining. So Sarvabhauma is an example of that. Someone he actually got upgraded by his association with Mahaprabhu. And so he originally subscribed, of course, no doubt, some Leela element is also there. But he he actually originally was from the Navadvip area, and we stopped at his birthplace during the Navadvip Parikrama. But he originally was he was subscribed to the Mayavad philosophy, the impersonalist conception. But he had this natural paternal affection for Mahaprabhu, and that was his wealth. That was his fortune. That was like the starting point. Mahaprabhu, after he took sannyas, then he's traveling with like about 4 other devotees. I think maybe it says 4 in Chaitanya Bhagavan, Chaitanya Charitamrita. They give different descriptions of this. I think one says 4, one says 5. But Nityananda was there, and who else was there? I can't remember. But anyway, Mahaprabhu left the Navadvip area, specifically Shantipur, where they had the last gathering, right, at Advaita Acharya's house. And then along the way, he had this minor dispute with Nityananda Prabhu, right? Because Mahaprabhu went to bathe in a river, and he left his danda, his sannyas stick, with Nityananda Prabhu, like to take care of. But when he came back, Nityananda had broken it into 3 pieces. And for reasons which are not completely made clear, right? And so Mahaprabhu was very upset. And he said, I only asked you to do one thing. I just asked you to take care of my danda. And you couldn't do that. And he says, I'm not traveling with you to Puri. Either I'll go ahead of you and you come after me, or you can go ahead of me and I'll go after you. We're not going together. And so then they agree, okay, Prabhu, you go ahead of us, we'll follow some distance behind you. So Mahaprabhu ends up arriving alone to Puri, which isn't such a good idea, because in his moments of ecstasy, he becomes a hazard to his own self. And so, sure enough, in the Jagannath temple, he goes into a state of ecstasy. And the priest in the temple, they don't appreciate it. They just think he's some like emotional madman, and they're getting ready to throw him out. But this Sarvabhauma is there. And funnily enough, he can recognize that even though he's a Mayavadi, he recognizes that Mahaprabhu is showing symptoms of divine love. It's not just some emotional thing. So he takes Mahaprabhu to his home, and takes care of him, and he sees Mahaprabhu as this. He's only 24 years old, right? He's this beautiful young sannyasi, and he feels this natural kind of paternal feeling of protection over him. Especially because normally in the traditional culture, persons would take sannyas like when they're 50, 60 years old, right? So for like a young man to do that, a beautiful wife and his mother at home, and career ahead of him, right? And so much beauty, youth, intelligence, fame as a Sanskrit scholar. So the fact that he, was leaving that up and taking up the renounced order was quite shocking and disturbing even for some people. But Sarvabhauma felt very protective. Oh, how will he maintain his sannyas? How can he keep it up? And so he thought to himself, what I can do, because Sarvabhauma was pretty much the #1 scholar in the region, and he was an advisor to the king. Maybe he was like the head scholar in the king's court, something like that. And so he thought, what I can do is I can instruct him in the Vedanta, right? The Vedanta Sutra, or Vedanta Darshan is, is emphasizing so much Vairagya, right? Renunciation and focus on the divine, right? On Brahman. And so he thought, if I can like school him in this, and he knows he's very expert in all these things, and if I can school him in this, that will help to ground him in his renunciation. And then meanwhile, Gopinath is his, I always forget, his son-in-law or brother-in-law. His sister's husband, that means his brother-in-law. Meanwhile, his brother-in-law is a great devotee of Mahaprabhu. And so he hears about this plan. He does not appreciate it. It's like, do you not realize this is the Supreme Lord? Right? He's not just some boy you need to help. And he's very upset. And so they have a whole debate about this, which is described in Madhya chapter 6. It's actually a very important chapter. It's one of the key chapters that Srila Sridhar Maharaj personally instructed our Gurudev. And why? Because it's showing the defeat of the Mayavad conception. Because there's a philosophical discussion that's recorded. Well, there's the discussion between Sarvabhauma and his brother-in-law, but then later there's a discussion with Mahaprabhu and Sarvabhauma. So it's very helpful in that regard. So I guess we can just talk about this. It's a principle. Pandita knows all these things, but for you, this is like an important section, So Gopinath and Sarvabhauma, they have this very interesting discussion, debate. And one of the things that comes up in their discussion is that they have some debate going back and forth, right? And then at a certain point, Gopinath says, "Oh, you know what? No, there's no point in discussing this more. You're just not able to understand this. It's not your fault." Like that. Don't worry. You can't help it. You're just ignorant. And then he says, actually, you can only know the Lord if He gives you the grace to know Him. And there's this famous verse. It's from Lord Brahma's prayers, which I can't remember right now. Atapite deva parambuja dvai prashada leshanu bahita eva hi janati bhaktyam bhagavan mahimno nachanye ko. But saying that prasada lesh, or prasada lesh, prasada lesh, means if you have just a trace of grace, of prasad, then you can understand Him. If He gives you His... Otherwise, for many ages of time, you can struggle, right, and wrangle with your brain, and you can never understand. But if you just get one drop of His mercy, then you can know everything. So Gopinath tells this, little naughtily, right, to Sarvabhauma. And then Sarvabhauma says, well, hang on a second. What's the evidence that you've got that grace and I don't? And then how does Gopinath reply? He says, because I'm able to recognize Him and you're not. It's as simple as that. Self-evident truth. Self-evident truth. The only proof of it is your own experience, ultimately. So then Sarvabhauma just kind of like ends the conversation and changes the subject. And then what's very interesting, and I think of this sometimes, so then Sarvabhauma tells his master plan to Mahaprabhu, like, I'll take care of you. He arranges for a residence for him, because he's come all alone, Mahaprabhu, right? And he's showing himself to be very vulnerable. He's just like fainting in ecstasy, and he's so young. And so Sarvabhauma, it's a beautiful service opportunity, actually. And so he arranges for his accommodation. He says, look, I really want to help you. And another thing that he says is that because Mahaprabhu, there were so many different level, like there are different lineages from which one can take sannyas, and they're all sannyas, but some are, more highly reputed than others, right? Some have a higher standing. So Sarvabhauma tells him, if you like, I can upgrade your sannyas. Like, I can give you connection with a higher sampradaya. And this is another thing that really bothers Gopinath. Like, who are you to try and upgrade him? He's the Supreme Lord. I don't think he actually does it in the end, but he mentions, like, I can do it for you later, if you want. But the interesting thing is that Mahaprabhu is so humble, because he sees that Sarvabhauma is coming from a place of affection and care. And so he just accepts that. And Sarvabhauma says, look, like, this is the program. I need to help you. You're so young. How are you going to maintain your sannyas life? So I'm going to teach you. I'm going to instruct you daily in the Vedanta. And so for 7 days it goes on. And it's funny because, Sarvabhauma is the grihasta. He's a householder. So technically he's according to social standards, he's in a lower position. Mahaprabhu's in the senior position. Of course, from the absolute perspective, is also the case. But so what he does is he puts, even though he's instructing Mahaprabhu, he follows the etiquette and he puts Mahaprabhu in a higher seat and he sits on the floor. So he's instructing Mahaprabhu like at his feet. That's another kind of sweet thing. So this goes on for 7 days. 7 days he's instructing Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu's just quietly sitting through it all. Just very instructive, right? Just tolerating it for 7 days. And then, when he's in Mahaprabhu, he's not saying a word. He's like just quietly accepting, listening. And Sarvabhauma is giving these, totally bogus explanations. And then finally, at the end of 7 days, Sarvabhauma says, like, are you understanding anything? Like, you're so quiet, I don't know. Like, you don't have a question or a comment or anything? And do you understand, what I'm saying? And then Mahaprabhu tells him, he says, I can understand the verses themselves, but I cannot understand your explanations. He says that the verses of the Vedanta Sutra, they're very clear, but you're obscuring them with clouds of logic. And I cannot understand that. Then Sarvabhauma was like, whoa, like, who is this boy? Like, this is what I expected. Like, he thought he's just kind of dumbly sitting and listening. And then, I don't remember exactly what was the exact dialogue, but then they come to the discussing the... Oh, I think perhaps what happened is Mahaprabhu says something like, Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And we can understand the Vedanta Sutra like in the light of Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? And so the Vedanta Sutra is similar in the same style as the Upanishads. And this is a section of the Vedas which they're very abstract. And they have some special dignity amongst Vedic scholars because they're dealing exclusively with the spiritual side. Because a lot of the Vedas, they're mixed with worldly needs. And so like they're like attractive for the general people. But for people who are like serious spiritual seekers or spiritual scholars, then, there's nothing there, not much there for them. So then they're attracted to the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra, which are describing, focusing on Brahman, right? This impersonal aspect. From the superficial reading of them, right? And there are many kind of very abstract, hazy statements there, which can be interpreted in different ways. Like for example, he can run faster, like describing the divine, that divine entity can run faster than anyone but has no legs, can see everything but has no eyes, and all these things. And the idea is that he has no mundane eyes, he has no mundane legs, but it doesn't mean he doesn't have the spiritual expression of these things. And it's getting people away from the material side. The very first line of the Vedanta Sutra. The Vedanta Sutra is a text, it's a short text that was composed just before Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's a very celebrated text among scholars. But the very first line is Atato Brahma Jigyasa, which means now search after spirit. The idea being like, now that you've finished like the enjoying side, now come to the plane of spirit. Like you realize there's nothing there, you finished your course in the world of karma. Now come to the real thing. Search after Brahma, search after spirit. So, but then after the Vedanta Sutra, the next and final Vedic text is Srimad Bhagavatam. And really, Srimad Bhagavatam is an explanation of Vedanta Sutra. And we were mentioning, actually it was with Dulal Krishna. I think you weren't there, or maybe you were there. But there's one of the ways in which you can see the link is that the second verse of Vedanta Sutra is the first line of Srimad Bhagavatam. This Janmad Yasya Yataha, right? That from which everything was born from. That which is the origin of everything. That from which everything has come. This is the first line of the first phrase of the second verse of Vedanta Sutra, and it's the very first line of Srimad Bhagavatam. So you can see there's obviously a link. So it's like Srimad Bhagavatam is saying, we're picking up the thread in Vedanta Sutra, and we're going to elaborate upon that here in Srimad Bhagavatam. That is actually of a personal nature. That entity which is described in a very abstract way in Vedanta Sutra, we're making it clear he's actually a person in Srimad Bhagavatam. So Mahaprabhu makes this point, actually we can understand Vedanta Sutra through Srimad Bhagavatam. And so then they have a little discussion about Bhagavatam, and then this one of the famous verses of Bhagavatam is the Atmarama verse, right? Which is saying that even the Atmaramas, the liberated souls, Atmarama, who are tasting Rama, pleasure within the self, Atma, they also relish hearing the topics of the Lord. And that's a whole other discussion, that verse. But so and then Sarvabhauma, he's like the way Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains it, like Sarvabhauma's feeling kind of, shaken up, like this boy is like talking like he knows more than me, and then to kind of like regain his prestige, then he gives all these explanations of this Atmarama verse. I think it was 9 explanations, like showing off his knowledge to Mahaprabhu, like to show, like, I'm the guy here, don't forget, And then Mahaprabhu was listening humbly, and he says, very nice, there's also more, that you could say, Then Sarvabhauma's like, can you say some more? So Sarvabhauma had just given 9 explanations. Then Mahaprabhu gives another 16 explanations on that verse. I believe it's 16. And then Sarvabhauma's like, then he understands, okay, this is not an ordinary man, and he understands. He can recognize, this isn't an ordinary man. It's not ordinary knowledge. And so then they end their meeting, and Sarvabhauma, his head is reeling, and then I don't remember exactly the sequence after that. Does he have a dream, or do you remember exactly what happens? But he finally comes to the realization that Mahaprabhu is... then they have a whole...
he showed himself, didn't he?
Yes,
Or had a
he
vision
did.
Of Nityananda.
No, not Nityananda. You're right. Mahaprabhu did show him the six-armed form, with, which is, this six-armed form is representing like Ramachandra, Krishna, and Mahaprabhu, perhaps. But before that, they had a whole discussion. But I'm not sure if it was the same day or the next day. It might have been the next day. Then they met again. And then they have a whole philosophical discussion where Mahaprabhu defeats the conception of Shankaracharya, the impersonal conception and interpretation of the Vedas. And then Sarvabhauma is fully convinced. And then there's that incident the next morning, right? The Mahaprabhu, you remember that. Mahaprabhu comes to his house early in the morning after the Mangalarati, knocking at his door. And Sarvabhauma is like just getting out of bed, and Mahaprabhu comes with this Mahaprasad. And previously, like the old Sarvabhauma, first he'd have to bathe and, chant some mantras, and there would be a whole thing before you would take prasadam. But now he's come to this, line of devotion. He's just accepting, the Lord is here personally giving me prasad. I must immediately take that. So Mahaprabhu gives, Sarvabhauma immediately takes without washing even his mouth. Right? And Mahaprabhu's overjoyed. And he says, now I have conquered the three worlds because Sarvabhauma has developed so much faith in Mahaprasad. Very beautiful. And then the other thing that's very funny is Sarvabhauma becomes very fanatic, and there's this particular verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. We were discussing it the other day. It's quite a well-known verse. Tate nukampam susamik shamano. You know this verse. It's saying that. One who can accept that they are responsible for their karma, and also can see the Lord's grace behind that. Such a person is heir to liberation. They will very quickly achieve liberation. So Sarvabhauma, he decides that he has to change the verse. This is a Bhagavatam verse. He decides because it uses the word mukti, liberation. Mukti pade sadaya bhak. And he wants to change it to bhakti. He's become such a fanatic. He's saying, what is this mukti? We're not interested in liberation. We have to change it to bhakti. So he tells Mahaprabhu, we have to change the Bhagavatam. But then Mahaprabhu explains, actually the highest connotation, the real connotation of liberation is devotion. Like real liberation means devotion. Real liberation doesn't just mean to be detached from the negative side, but it means to have entrance into the positive side. So that is just understand the proper meaning behind it. You don't have to change the words. And another very wonderful thing that happens is that later there's this meeting on a rooftop, and I'm trying to remember exactly. Very beautiful. There's a meeting on a rooftop. Sarvabhauma was with the king, Prataparudra. Trying to find it. And they're watching 200 Mahabhagavats headed by Advaita Acharya coming from Navadvip, riding to Puri to meet with Mahaprabhu. And it's an extraordinary scene because normally when they're like on this high rooftop, Sarvabhauma and the king, Prataparudra. and they're watching this big group, 200 devotees from Navadvip. And normally, when you go to a holy place, there are so many rituals that you're meant to follow, right? Like you